There we go. Who knew?
Good morning, everybody. Sorry we were a couple minutes late. We did have some technical difficulties that we were able to work through. So we're going to give everybody just a couple of minutes to join, and then we will get started. For those of you just joining, we are running just a couple of minutes behind. We had just a couple of minutes of technical difficulties there. So we're going to give everybody just a couple of minutes to get situated and into the room, and then we will get started. So just bear with us this morning.
All right.
Yeah, I think we're getting there for sure. We have made it to Friday anyway, right?
Yahoo!
Right. So I'm seeing a lot of familiar names here joining us this morning, Dr. Harvey. And so I'm super excited because this is our last scheduled seminar that you're doing for us. And I say scheduled because it's just been so well received and it's such valuable information. We were sort of talking before about how important this is while we were working through our technical difficulties. So I'm super excited to have you, here this morning to sort of put a bow on everything that we've been talking about. So we have been partnering with Dr. Harvey for several different sessions. So we've done just some basic trauma-informed care. We did trauma-informed behavior plans. She has been to one of the state-operated developmental centers and done some work and some intense work with some train the trainers for us. So we're excited to take that and sort of, champion that out in the world. And then last month you did trauma-informed behavior plans and we got great feedback about that. And so today we're going to talk about trauma-informed leadership. And so we're super excited to sort of end our week with that. I think that it's important. I think that it is necessary and meaningful for us in what we do in today's world. So before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping things. I am covering for Danielle Daly. I'm Amy Burke. I'm one of the directors with ICPN. And so everybody is muted and your cameras are off so we can't see you. And if you have any questions, we encourage you to use the chat box. We will take a break about halfway through and then reconvene and ask any questions or comments that you have at that time. This is meant to be pretty interactive. And so if you have any questions, I'll monitor that and sort of throw them in there. And so we encourage you to, really sort of observe this and think about what you need and take that away. And so I think that's it. We will do just a little bit of housekeeping at the end as well. Let me see. I think we're close to maybe having everybody. So is there anything else you need from me before you get started?
All good.
Okay.
All right. Well, I am so excited to be here. This is and thank you all. This is a privilege. I mean, this organization, you guys are amazing, and you sponsor so many good initiatives and do so much. So it's a real honor to be speaking for you and to be here and to be a part of this. And all these opportunities have meant so much to me. So thank you so much. And thank you all for coming with your precious time.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back on and say, really, truly, the honor is ours. Like, this has been just so well received and so necessary with what we're doing in the state of Illinois right now. And I think that the feedback has been amazing. And so I think everybody is thrilled to learn a little bit more today.
Oh, thank you, Amy. You're the best. Thank you. Wonderful. So now that my ego is this big, I'm going to talk, but I want to say thank you so much to each and every one of you. Every single person here has done things that nobody knows about, right? The last 3 years, how about that year, that first year of COVID? Oh my gosh, every single one of you, I know, because you're watching this webinar, and that means you're probably working, because this isn't really entertainment. I try and make some jokes. I will, I promise. But you haven't quit, and you've done such great work. Oh my goodness, you have given heart and soul. I know this. So to all of you out there, thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you've done in the last 3 years, for the way that you've kept things going. Many of you supporting folks directly, many of you supporting supporters, and many of you just keeping things going, right? Think about what would have happened if you weren't there. And then on top of it, so many of you have kids, and you had to negotiate all that and the impact on your kids. And then many of you having older parents that you had to worry about, or all of the above, those in the sandwich. So I just want to stop and really acknowledge that. And thank you, all of you, for all you've done for so many people. You are a giving group of people. I know this because it's so rewarding for me that everywhere I go throughout the country, if I'm Zooming or if I go places, I meet the cream of the crop. I meet the best people in that state or that province, because the best people are people who care about people with disabilities and people who keep going. And I know you all did, kept doing your jobs, kept figuring it out, kept giving everything you needed to give to keep people going. So I can't emphasize that enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we went through some trauma. It was not easy. It was tough. And it was trauma for the folks we support. It was trauma for us, right? And, we're not really done. So that's the thing. I think a lot of us are feeling like, well, I should feel okay now. I should be better now. But everywhere I go and all the people I talk to are telling me, ways in which they're still struggling. And it's still challenging, and ways in which the folks we support are challenging. How many of you know somebody who doesn't want to come back, right? We encouraged people to stay safe, and now they don't feel safe doing anything but being home. That's some people's families don't want them to come back. I mean, I know agencies are struggling in that way to try to provide the services they need and they're supposed to provide, because a lot of folks have really shut down. Like, so much is going on. And this has been a trauma for us all, a shared trauma. And so I just want to take that time and say thank you and acknowledge this and acknowledge the fact that it's not over. it's not really over, and it hasn't, it's tough. It hasn't gone away. So thank you so, so much for all you have done, every single one of you. There is a Buddhist saying from a wonderful, wonderful Buddhist leader called Nichiren Daishonin of the 13th century, who taught people to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And I love this quote where he says, unseen virtue brings visible reward. So I know everybody here, every single person here performed all kinds of unseen virtues, right? Did things for other people that no one knows about, maybe checked on a neighbor, checked on a friend, supported somebody with a disability. You are really amazing. And I know this because it's the people in this field, the work we do, that you give and give and you give from your hearts, and you do so much. And it was a very tough time. And you supported people through it on different levels, whoever you did. So take a minute and think about that and congratulate yourself, because that's another thing we don't do, right? You just think about what's the next thing, right? Okay, I got that done. What do I need to do now? Rather than stopping to congratulate yourself or have that sense of accomplishment, even say, wow, look, I did it, or I survived. So thank you, because this was a tough time. And the other thing that is important to me to do is to take a moment and honor the lives we lost. So we lost a number of people with disabilities. I just got back from several days of training in New York, and a large agency that's in New York and all the boroughs in the city and in New Jersey. And boy, did they lose a lot of people. But I think anyone who's worked in a urban area really experienced a lot of trauma and a lot of loss during COVID, and rural areas as well. So they were sharing with me the first person who died from COVID was a person receiving supports in their agency. Someone who in New Jersey was the first person who died in that state. And then there were a number of people that they lost in New York. Very tough time. So I'm going to take a moment to honor all those lives. They will not be forgotten. We also lost staff. We lost staff, and staff lost mothers and fathers. And I've talked to many people. This was a very impactful time. So there were staff who passed away from COVID. And then there were also staff who just said, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. It was a very tough time. And I think everywhere I go, everybody's having a real difficult time dealing with staff turnover and staff who have quit. And people can make more money working at Target, working at Walmart, at the convenience store down the street, because the society doesn't value us, right? Society doesn't value people doing this important work. And during COVID, one of the things, I was lucky because I had some time to think the first few months, right? All the travel stopped, everything stopped. My therapy sessions, we had to figure out how to do them online and do teletherapy. And I had some time to think. And that was a blessing in its own way, because I reflected and I said, okay, we're doing the trauma-informed leadership. I'm working with folks with trauma. What can I do next? What's really going to make a difference? And I realized that if we don't have trauma-informed leadership, if we don't support the DSPs, there's no way we can ask them to be trauma-informed with the people receiving supports. And I realized that that was the whole, and I reflected on my many years. So for about 37 years, I'm very old, right? So for about 37 years, I've worked inside of provider agencies. So then recently I transitioned to a clinic, and I'm still doing therapy with folks, and I'm doing trainings. But most of my career, I worked usually I stayed about 8 or 9 years, and then someone else offered me something better and I moved on. Grass is always greener, right? But always inside of provider agencies. So, I always worked a lot directly with staff. We wrote the plans, we trained the staff, we did therapy, we did all kinds of things. And I started reflecting on all those years where it worked, where managers got it right, where I learned from managers how to work with folks, and where it didn't work, and where administrators didn't get it right? Where there were problems, where there were issues, and what those issues are. And I started to reflect on the fact that where the people receiving supports were doing the best was not if they didn't have behavior problems or if they were a certain type of person that we accepted, but instead it was really where the staff felt valued, where the managers really supported their staff, where people knew that they were appreciated, where the staff were all in, and that's where folks were doing well. And oftentimes they were supporting some of the most difficult people or who came to us with difficult challenges. But then those folks calmed down because they felt cared about. We've talked a lot in all of these trainings about the triangle and a triangle of healing, which is people having a sense of safety, having connections, and having a sense of empowerment. And when staff feels safe, they can convey that. And they can create that kind of atmosphere that's a healing atmosphere. But when you don't have trauma-informed leadership, when staff are always working in an atmosphere of fear, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired or I'm going to do this wrong thing, and, or this kind of punitive environment, then it's very hard for them to be the buffer, stop everything, and just be very supportive and, trauma-informed. And what do I mean when I say trauma-informed? I apologize. I have a little bit of cough left over from a cold, but the good news is none of you will catch it. Every time I cough, it won't matter. But so I apologize in advance. But at least I won't be making anybody sick. So what do I mean by trauma-informed? What I mean is really understanding what that person has been through and what they need to feel supported. This doesn't mean excusing them from doing their job. It doesn't mean looking the other way when things are bad or not done right, but it means being supportive in the approach, even if it's a corrective approach. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, what trauma-informed leadership looks like and what that support needs to be, particularly with the unique challenges of our field. And that's the tough part, right? That's the tough part, because there are so many unique challenges in our field. And let's look at some of them. So the lack of professionalization is first and foremost, right? This is the largest issue. NADSP is a wonderful organization run by John Raphael and Joe Macbeth. And every year they go to Washington, D.C., they go to our congressman and they say, we need a labor code for the direct support professional who works with people with intellectual disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities. And every year they are turned down. They're getting closer, and we had a Bill of Rights for people with disabilities and we had Biden involved. They are getting closer and we're making progress. But still, there's so far to go, and still there is no labor code. We need more societal support, and that's so tough for people. I found out that in the UK, kids will say, when you say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Kids will sometimes say, I want to be a direct support person. I want to work with people with disabilities. It's considered a respected profession. And that's what we need, right? Because you know, a lot of us can tell you what do our friends say when we say we work with folks with intellectual disabilities? Oh, you must be so patient. Oh, aren't you wonderful? Aren't you a saint? No, I'm doing work I enjoy. Do people say that to teachers? It should be on the same level as being a teacher, as being a therapist, right? As being a social worker. It's important work, and society doesn't always recognize it. And that affects the people doing the work because their friends and family don't even understand what they're doing, right? I bet you all know what I'm talking about. I bet many of you can relate. I was told by so many people how patient I was, and actually I'm not patient. I'm so impatient. That's why I do these talks. I'm like ranting and raving all the time. Like, stop, we've got to change this. I'm actually incredibly impatient. I'm not an impatient person. I just like people with disabilities a lot. So, right? Society doesn't get it. The lack of opportunities for true community inclusion. This is very hard on the DSP. Very, very hard. I know the last agency that I work with, we had checklists, like you had to be in the community at least 3 times a week, and you had to be doing, you know, community integrated activities, and the staff didn't know how to do that. And sometimes they did, and people were really creative, but more often than not, they were at a loss. And so they were driving around in a van, watching everybody live their life. That's called being a tourist in your community, not being a part of it. Because the staff didn't have those connections in their community to really be able to help people get connected. And yet there was so much pressure, there is so much pressure on them. And COVID shut that all down. And then there was so much pressure to keep people safe. So it's a very tough position, and no wonder we have turnover. Such turnover. And turnover in the DSP world is so hard on the DSPs who don't leave, right? Often asked to work extra shifts, often having to take on extra responsibilities. This has been a really tough impact. This recent, like the Great Resignation that occurred throughout the country and really hit our field hard, has been so hard on the people doing the work on the front line who are left to do more. And I think we have to acknowledge that. I know you do. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. And that limited funding and resources, of course, right? That's a big, big issue because people don't make a living wage. And that lack of a living wage is very impactful. Oftentimes staff are coming to us from not having had a lot of money either and having their own financial stress. And then they take a job that's not enough. So they have to work that second job and sometimes that third job. And we make a number of demands while people are working 2 and 3 jobs. It's very, very tough. And I'm not telling you things you don't know. You know, we found so interesting in agency I worked in, we really put a lot of the day-to-day maintenance on the staff, right? Where we expected people to really just carry it forward and be taking care of the houses. And then I remember the residential director realizing and saying, you know, many of my staff never lived in a house. Many of my staff don't really understand when we say change, you know, the dryer sheet, change this, do that, because they never did that. They went to a laundromat. You know, look at the vent there. And he was starting to realize and sharing with us that, oh my goodness, you know, we're asking people to do things and expecting that they know how to do things that they didn't grow up doing and they don't know about. So that was a lot of stress on people as well. So I saw the question about the slides. So Danielle has the slides and we will be distributing them if you like them. I know somebody else is answering that as well. So Thank you for asking for that. Interesting. We know about the effects of adverse childhood experiences, right? So there was a large study done, and many, many follow-up studies by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, looking at how childhood adverse experiences affect you throughout your life. And they found that childhood adverse experiences, could be death of a parent, could be divorce. I mean, there's a long list, and I don't want to give you the list because who needs to be re-traumatized, right? Life on planet Earth is hard. We'll just leave it at that. And it's not easy. And then they have the effects. So this scale, which I stole from their website, shows the effects of some of these adverse experiences. Disrupted neurodevelopment. So people don't often develop as well as they can because it's hard to learn in school when you have a lot of trauma at home, right? There's all kinds of emotional issues, adoption of health risk behaviors, high risk behaviors. People smoke more, they drink more. That explains some of my issues. Disease, disabilities, social problems, and then there's a lot of research showing early death. So that all has its impact. And an interesting and important study was done by John Kiesler out of Indiana University. He's at Illinois University now, really important person in our field, really outstanding researcher. And he looked at DSPs, the direct support professionals, and their adverse childhood experiences. And 30% of them had more than 4. So that's like off the hook, right? Had a lot of adversity in childhood. And his research showed that in fields, as compared to other fields, people working with folks with intellectual disabilities have often have more adverse trauma histories, right? Adverse childhood experiences than any other field. So when people come to us and apply for this work, they often are bringing so much of just their life experience, which has often been very difficult. I mean, we can all think about people we know, right, who have been through so much. And I know many of us have been through so much, but those experiences affect us. And he said, actually, 75% reported at least one. And these numbers are low, I believe, because people don't always report. So, but this was his research, and he says he thinks it was low as well. And here are his recommendations, which I really treasure. He says, we need to create awareness amongst DSPs and supervisors regarding trauma, triggers, and trauma responses. We need to promote supervisory styles that are sensitive to the implications of adversity and trauma. And that's what we're talking about today. And foster cultures within organizations that are trauma informed. And that's really important. Because staff come to us with their own traumas, right? And let's look at that for a minute. Many staff come having experienced racism and discrimination. Here's Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. This kind of thing has been going on for centuries. But we saw it up close and personal during COVID. Finally, people were watching more closely and how impactful. And if you've been the victim of racism and then you witness it, even just on TV, it can be re-traumatizing. And it was for many people. We all know that, right? Many of us know it. And that has such an impact. And so often staff are coming to us with having already experienced a lot of discrimination, being the target of racism, maybe coming in not trusting, maybe in many agencies that I've worked in, management are predominantly white and the workforce is not, right? So there's all kinds of things that may cause people to be wary, to not trust. And I think that's something that's important for us to understand and address, have diversity on every level in every way possible. And also be sensitive. Be sensitive. Intergenerational trauma is a reality as well, right? People carrying their family trauma. I spent several years doing a number of trainings up in Canada. And when I did this, the first time I did the trauma-informed leadership training, somebody raised their hand after my slide about racism. This woman raised her hand and she's like, "Do you have a slide about Indigenous people?" And I was like, "No, I'm so sorry." But she really educated me and asked her to also, take some of the time from my training and share some of the issues, which people largely knew. But, we've seen so much now that's come out where children were forced to go to these residential schools and some never came back. And now, decades later, we find the remains of bodies that were buried there. There were things called sweeps where they took children who were Indigenous out of their home and placed them in white homes. And many people never saw their kids again, couldn't find them. This woman shared with me that she never saw her aunt and her uncle. The uncle had died and her aunt never reconnected. And they were called swept. It was a sweep. Horrible things. We also know, so many populations like people who survived the Holocaust and had children. Those children carried so much intergenerational trauma, right? We see so much on so many levels. And so when people come to us, we don't know what kind of intergenerational trauma they're carrying. We don't know what they've been through. And we don't have to know, right? We don't have to ask. It's not our business, but we should assume that people have struggled. And I know where I work in the Maryland, in the Baltimore area, we have a number of people come to us and work who are from different countries. And definitely, oh yes, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Wow. So we have a number of people who come to us from different countries and, right, they have the trauma of immigration, then they have the trauma of being treated in a certain way, and then the trauma of not feeling included. And then they come to us and, we're complaining about the way they cook or whatever. So there's all levels of trauma based on discrimination, based on that intersectionality, right, of different types of discrimination as well. And, I love this quote from Gabor Mate, where he says, trauma is not what happened to you, it's how what happened to you made you feel, right? And that's the truth. And Bruce Perry says, trauma isn't what happened to you, trauma is what happened to you, I'm sorry, rather than looking at what's wrong with somebody, what happened to you is the issue. So it is what happened to you. It's what are you bringing to the table? And if we look at the DSPs and we look at what they bring to the table, we've got to acknowledge that oftentimes people have been through so much, right? And they're coming in with that. And then we ask them to do work with folks who have trauma. And we know that has an impact, that working day to day with somebody that has trauma can cause secondary trauma, right? Or what's called vicarious trauma, where you're working with this traumatized person who maybe has a history of sexual abuse or being physically abused, and they don't trust you. And maybe they hit you if you come too close, or maybe they get upset with you, or maybe they're breaking things. And that affects you. We all know. So folks with intellectual disabilities, there's a very high rate of sexual abuse. I saw a statistic, 83% of folks have had some kind of sexual assault in some manner with an intellectual disability. But I know from being a part of the Joe Shapiro, this NPR series, and being with him and listening to him, that the Bureau of Justice, he went to them and said, will you look at your reported incidents of sexual assaults and compare how many people had intellectual disabilities, whereas how many people did not? And they came back to him and they said, people with intellectual disabilities are 7 times more likely to be sexually abused. And then he says that number is very low because those are only the people where there was a police report, right? And when I'm doing these trainings, I often ask people, how many of you know somebody with an intellectual disability who's sexually abused? And usually it's always about 2/3 of the room that will raise their hand. So you're working with someone that already has that trauma and those issues, the physical abuse. Basically, everybody with an intellectual disability has been bullied on some level, unless they were raised in a bubble, right? Think about 6th or 7th grade. I hate to bring it up, but do any of you remember being bullied? I'm so sorry. You're very together. It should not have happened. And look at you now, professionals who are giving your lives to help others. And, you know, I have good news. All those bullies, they peaked in high school. It was downhill ever since. So, you know, they were talking about being on the hockey team or being on the football team. They're drinking beer, sitting on their porch, drinking beer, talking about when they were the star, and it's all downhill. Or maybe they're just sitting on their couch because they don't even have a porch, which is okay not to have a porch, but you know what I'm saying? They peaked in high school. And oh, I'm so sorry, Katie. Katie shared that. I'm so sorry. So you totally get it, and you know. And now I'm so sorry. And so many very, very, very intelligent people have all kinds of learning disabilities, and we know this, and we're misplaced by the school system and not understood. And so sorry, Rebecca. So, you know, that bullying, when we think about it, you can still experiencing that little twinge of hurt, right? Because that pain is real. And I'm so sorry. It is horrible and it shouldn't have happened. And thank you for sharing it. And now I want to ask you, do you remember somebody in your class or in your school who had an intellectual disability, maybe a genetic disorder, maybe autism, maybe just some issue that was very pronounced? And what did they go through on a daily basis? How many times were they called the R word? Yeah. Yeah. So there you go, Courtney. And you were bullied so much because people didn't get you. I'm so glad that you're here now and you're working in this field, because we need you. We need people who understand. And I'm so sorry that you were bullied. I'm so sorry for all the bullying experiences. And yet on a level, and Julie too, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Right, people speak to you in baby voices, like, oh my gosh, Lori said, and yeah, and talking down to you, and such a hard time. And because you're you chose to take that pain and help others. And that's beautiful. And that kind of speaks to the fact that we have more people in this field who have a trauma history or have adverse, and being bullied is an adverse childhood experience. We have more people in this field who come to us with this. And I'm so sorry about your son. So many people have shared with me, Rebecca, how they either put their kid in a special school or homeschooled their children because of bullying. And you would think in this day and age that it would be better, but it seems on some level that it's even gotten worse. And thank you for sharing that. So now think about what people went through with disabilities or what they're going through. And I know many of you are parents, right? It's very hard. It's very hard. And then we're asking folks to work with people with this level of trauma. And many of them were abandoned by their families. How many of you work with older folks who were institutionalized for much of their life? Or people who've been, sometimes younger, in repeated foster care placements, so they are not connected with their family, or maybe it was unsafe to be with their family. So much trauma there, and so much difficulty actually trusting anyone. And we ask staff who have their own trauma, right, to come in and work with this traumatized person. And that's really hard. Being excluded is trauma, because what we're asking people is to see their pain and support them with their pain, And in the reality is that in doing that, you end up absorbing some of the pain. And, so we have got to figure out how to really support staff in the best possible way, because the job we ask them to do involves pain. So number one, it involves when you're working with traumatized people, which most folks with intellectual disabilities have a certain degree of post-traumatic stress disorder, may come out and look like a behavior problem, but I feel very strongly is really a manifestation of their post-traumatic stress disorder from all the bullying or from the institutionalization or repeated foster care placements or adolescent residential treatment programs, so many sources of trauma that they have. And then we ask people to work with them and they're absorbing that trauma. Also, what happens is when you work with folks for a while, sometimes people pass away and staff are so impacted with their own grief, which is part of the job. Really, that's even more pain. So tough, right? And people have complex trauma. People have layers of trauma. So here's Renee, and she's given me permission to tell her story. And Renee really highlighted to me the importance of trauma-informed leadership and how precious the staff who give their hearts and souls to people are. Yeah, I know. And Lori says it because people have trauma, it's so hard to leave. I know. And I think what we have to do is just, bring our wisdom and our knowledge everywhere we go and try to support people to the best of our ability. And they won't forget when they were seen and heard and validated like you did. That validation lasts. And that's what happened with Renee. So I was told that when they have a person in their day program who screams all the time and probably needs counseling, definitely needs a behavior plan. And I was brought in to do counseling because I will do counseling out of the clinic. And sometimes I go to people, and I was asked to work with Renee. And Renee had very complex trauma because she was abused as a child. She was sexually abused by siblings. She was neglected by her mother. So much went on. And Renee really healed through a love relationship. She was with a wonderful guy who was also at the day program, but they figured out ways to have dates. And they had a beautiful relationship, and he proposed to her and they were engaged. They had a date for a wedding. They were going to get married, and they were trying to work with their service coordinators to be able to live together, which in Maryland is not an easy thing for two people with disabilities to do, sadly. But they were really fighting for that. And her fiance, who had muscular dystrophy and a lot of health issues related to that, he passed away from COVID, right? And that was so hard. That was unbelievably hard on Renee. And that happened in July. But they called me in October. And I said, oh, so what's going on? Well, a while ago, her fiance died of COVID, but that was a while ago. I'm sorry, that was in July and it's October. That's not a short time to lose the person you love, the person you live for, the person that meant everything to her. And they said, well, but she was okay then. Here's what I found out we started doing grief counseling, which I strongly believe in. And in doing the grief counseling, it came out that actually there was a staff who really understood her, who was really wonderful. And I see that so many times. The people I've learned the most from about how to work with folks and give support have been the DSPs who really get it. In fact, to the point where when I'm asked to come and consult because of a behavior problem, I will always say, is there a staff that this person trusts? Because that's the expert. That's in addition to the person themselves, of course. But that's the one who can tell me what's really going on. If you've won the trust of that person, then you can tell me, right? So she had a staff who got her and used to take her by herself into a back room in this large medical day program and let her cry and comfort her and and she would say to her, get it all out, right? It's wonderful staff. You're so right. Get it all out, baby. Get it all out, sweetie. Just get it out, and would just sit with her. And she got in trouble. And they said to her, well, you can't do that because Renee doesn't have a one-on-one and you've got all these other people to be with. And so guess what she did? She left. So when October came, she had quit. And that was her first month not there. And that's when Renee was screaming. Because not only did she lose the love of her life, she lost the one staff who really got her. And Renee was so mad. And she said, it's the agency's fault because they were mean to her and they didn't pay her enough. And that agency did pay less than most agencies around. So Renee is smart. Renee knew what went on. And the one person who had really helped her in that crucial time was that staff. So then Renee was just so bereaved because she lost the staff and the love of her life. And it's taken a couple of years for her to be okay. And she's doing much, much better. And she's trying to leave the agency now. Good for her. Just hoping nobody from that agency is on this call, but I know they're not. It's a different state. But good for her. But the one person who got it wasn't supported. That staff gave her everything she needed, and they could have worked out some rotation. They could have worked out something knowing Renee was in crisis, but instead they punished her for it. And she already wasn't being paid well. So this is the system we're in, right? And that system has its own unique trauma. The inability, number one, first and foremost, the inability to make a living wage with only one job. Very tough, very tough. Difficult and conflicting policies, right? And one agency I worked at, they had the residential director was forcing everybody that you had to have community activities and you had to do something 3 to 4 times a week, no matter what. And they did have agency vehicles, right? But then they also had the safety director and the person in charge of vehicles who had this very punitive point system. If there was a tiny nick on the agency vehicle, you got a point. If there was a speeding camera picture, you got a point. If it was anything, a fender bender, you were really in trouble. And then you couldn't drive, and then you couldn't do your job. So people didn't want to go do community outings, and they would say things like, well, my folks don't want to go, or these guys don't really, they're not that into it, but they did want to go. But the staff were so scared that if they got too many points, or if anything happened to that van or that agency car, then they would lose their job or at least be suspended. Because that was so you had 2 different policies conflicting. The paperwork demands, the learning technology. At one point, we lost a number of people because everything got transferred into computers, right? All the systems transferred where you had to clock in and where you had to record your time and where all kinds of things. And I'm telling you, there were people that just said, I don't do that. I can't do that. People who'd worked in their jobs for 30 years, older people who said, it's not what I do. This is it. I can only do so much. I'm done. People who, when they left, so many folks were impacted, but we didn't support them. We didn't say, look, we'll work with you, or we'll give you classes. We just said, if you're not going to do it, you're going to need to go. You're right. And that left giant holes, right? That lack of respect. And oftentimes, I know I'm getting everybody depressed. Sorry about this, but this is the truth, right? And, sometimes staff feel like they're responsible for folks' behavioral issues. And I was guilty of doing that. Like, oh, they must not have followed the plan. My plan is so great. Thank you. My plan is so great. my plan is so wonderful. They just didn't follow it. No, the plan doesn't work. And we're setting staff up. And then we blame them when that person has a bad day. And so people leave. People don't want that. That's very hard on them. Or they become very, very controlling. And then that ultimately makes the situation worse. It creates a power struggle. And it doesn't make the job fun, right? When you come in every day and you think you have to control somebody's behavior and you think you might be in trouble if there's an issue. So this makes our work very hard. This is a trauma of just the nature of the work, having punitive disciplinary systems, very difficult. There's a lot of places I work where, the knee-jerk response is suspension. Oh, we'll suspend you. And then, often without pay because you were involved in something, or, we're holding you responsible because somebody else did something, but you should have known about it and reported it. So many punitive systems where we don't even realize how punitive it is and how much it affects that person on the front line. That isolation is very hard. Big piece, difficulty that we have to break. And I am going to come to good things and solutions. I promise you. But I knew I couldn't train and work in trauma-informed supports with people with intellectual disabilities without talking about trauma-informed leadership, because we ask so much for the staff. And if we don't look at the unique challenges of this work and what we ask of people, I think we can't really get there. I really do. So that isolation, let's look at our unique field. We have awake overnights. We have weekend staff. We have all kinds of crazy shifts. And the lack of opportunity for face-to-face supervision based on that creates this alienation, creates a sense of I'm totally alone. So people don't feel a part of a team. They don't feel connected to their supervisor. Oftentimes the only time they hear from their supervisors when they have a directive or a corrective, right? I need you to do this, or you did that wrong. And they're not having regular supervision. And research in the field of organizational development shows us that people need face-to-face supervision, even if it's just monthly, but they need something that's not just based on getting a list of things they're supposed to be doing, but they need a time to share with their supervisor what's been going. And thank you, Jeffrey. Exactly. That is it. You need that face-to-face, and we need to have connection, and we need to be listening to people because they have really hard jobs, right? And you have hard jobs. And everybody in this field needs to be able to have a supervisor that they can have some time just sharing what's going on, not getting the direction, not being told what they did wrong. And sometimes you have to do that, but they need a much higher proportion of listening and sharing. This is what's going on with us. This is what's happening with the person I'm supporting. This is what our challenges are. This is what the house is going through, or this is what we're going through in the program, and not just being told what to do. And they need that face-to-face. Really, really important. And John Raphael and Joe Macbeth often say people quit their supervisors, not that job. And I think people also quit being alienated. So sometimes they quit just not even being a part of a team. So it's so important. Human beings need connection. And we're asking people to do very human work, right? On a very human level. And so they need to feel like human beings. Lack of training. We often don't train people in the soft skills that are needed in how to listen to somebody and how to support them. That's why I'm so adamant about getting trauma-informed support training into new hire rotations so that people can get the fact that the folks that they're working with have trauma and they have to be ready for that and also take care of themselves, right? We train in all kinds of complex things, right? Bloodborne pathogens, med administration, but we need to train people in the soft skills of just, connecting with people and supporting folks who have trauma and how to do that. This list goes on forever, right? Inability to recruit or retain new staff, lack of valuing of experience, Oftentimes people aren't promoted because they don't have a degree. And that just makes me crazy. I had a big fight with the residential director at my last job. I kept saying, you can't put these people who come fresh out of school and have never worked in a house in charge of folks working for 20 years in homes who don't have a degree, but who know way more. So you got to start promoting from within. And finally they did, and they did cut down in turnover, intense schedules and multiple shifts. Some of the worst incidents that I've seen, and I've seen some bad stuff working in this field forever and being the person doing the crisis counseling after the incident. Some of the worst situations are when staff were really burned out, when they'd been working multiple shifts and they were exhausted and snapped. And then people lose their jobs because they were doing us a favor to work those extra shifts, but they weren't taking care of themselves and we weren't taking care of them. So I'm going to go through this real quickly, and then we can take a 5-minute break, just like Amy said, for a little self-care, and then we'll come back. So Laura Lipitsky talks about in her book, Trauma Stewardship. She also has a website that's down there. She talks about trauma exposure responses. And her book was very important because she was one of the first people to talk about burnout, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma in terms of being on a front line of the frontline workers. For a long time, we talked about it in the context of therapists and social workers, therapists working with, sometimes they're mandatory. Thank you. I'm going to go back to a comment that Jeffrey said, and then I'm going to come here because this is so important. Thank you, Jeffrey. Sometimes people are mandated to work over 20 hours or in different, yes, thank you, Jeffrey. And we are not going to get the best performance out of people. And sometimes we set up situations for incidents because no one can be their best. Thank you for sharing that, Jeffrey. We all saw that on the chat. That was really important, where Jeffrey said, sometimes places force you to work too much. And Laura Lipitsky, you can tell those people doing that to read her book, Trauma Stewardship, because she directly addresses running people into the ground, not taking care of that front line. And the fact that the secondary trauma isn't just the therapists, the people or the ER workers, it's the direct care professional working day to day. And she doesn't necessarily talk about people in the world of intellectual disabilities, because nobody does, right? Except for us. But she talks about people working with the homeless, people working with refugees, people who are there day to day, minute to minute, doing that caretaking, doing that frontline work, where they are every day with traumatized people. And then she talks about those symptoms of what she calls that trauma exposure response, where people are really getting that secondary trauma, exhaustion, right? And no matter how much rest you get, you're still tired. This may seem familiar to some of you, right? Numbness and disconnection, where you're just numb, where an incident happens and it's not even a surprise, or you're not even upset, even though it's horrible. And that's attenuation, where the negative starts to seem normal, because human beings can only take so much, right? We have to take care of ourselves and we have to take care of each other. Consumed by work, lack of self-care, right? That lack of balance, and that constant gnawing anxiety. And these are all symptoms of a trauma exposure response, where somebody's working with traumatized people and absorbing so much that it deeply affects them. This is something I want you all to think about, right? So Diane shares, when in leadership, working too many hours. Yeah. And it's sometimes the demands are just so unreasonable, and we have to figure out how to take care of ourselves, how to set some boundaries, right? And leadership has to figure out, as leaders, we have to figure out, how can we rotate people in and out of working with difficult folks? Or how can we, lessen that exposure? How can we set up a system that supports that direct support professional? What are things we can do, right? So let's come back at 10 after. And then I will talk about some of the things we can do to make it better. Okay, so take a little bit more than 5 minutes there, and then we'll come back. give everybody a little bit of a break. See you at 10 after. Okay. Oops. All right, we're back. Thank you. Thank you so much. So at this point, maybe I'll take a minute and just ask, does anyone want to share anything or any thoughts? Because this was kind of the tough part, right? Looking at all these stressors and how hard it is. And we've had such wonderful comments, or we can just keep going and keep, looking at the comments, which is great. I really appreciate what people have shared. And, we have unique demands in this field, and we attract, I think, people who have big hearts, who have a lot of compassion, but often who end up giving more than they should and hurting themselves in the process. So how can we help people to take better care of themselves? And how can we convey that, appreciation and care in leadership? And I think that makes all the difference. So, and thank you for all these wonderful comments throughout. I really appreciate them. So what is a trauma-informed culture? How can we shift? And I know many of you are working towards that in your individual work to try to bring that to people, bring that to your organizations, bring that to your agencies, to be that caring culture that can support the folks that we care about and support the staff. A trauma-informed culture values the person on the front line. And that is so important, because if we really want to value the people receiving supports, we have to value the person who is right there day to day. That's who counts, right, on a daily basis. Who are you going home to? Who are you working with? Who's there for you? We can have the greatest behavior plans, we can have the greatest therapists, we can have the greatest administration, we can have the greatest nurses, we can have every level of the organization be outstanding, but what matters is, who are you going home to every day? And does that person feel supported? That's the big question. And Lois says, over the years, all the challenges, I feel privileged to care for all individuals. Most help me as I help them. That is me too, I know. Listening and respecting one another counts. Well, thank you. That is everything. And you are someone who naturally does that, obviously. That's fantastic. How can we support all the DSPs or all the people on whatever level they're on to feel free to focus on listening and supporting, to understand that that's the most important thing? And how can we listen and support them? Just like I hope you're listened to and supported, Lois. Thank you. We have to value the person on the front line, create and commit to teams. And that's a big issue with the shifts that we have and with the unique challenges in our field. If that weekend person doesn't feel a part of the team, things aren't going to be the same as if they felt a part of a team supporting the people they're supporting. When they feel like they're just on their own, no one's checking in on them, they only hear if they did something wrong, they're not going to be able to be their best self. And if they are, they're just an extraordinary person, but it's not the norm, right? People need to feel, I'm a part of a team, I'm a part of something, and I'm valued. They need appropriate time off and breaks, something Jeffrey talked about earlier. So important. We've got to have that. I worked at an agency where the boss was trying to be nice to people, right? We had vacation time, and he said, okay, I'm going to let people, a lot of people had financial struggles, I'm going to let people cash out their vacation time, right? So he thought that was really nice, and it was. And so he said, we're going to cash out vacation time. And what happened was a lot of people just stopped taking vacations and just constantly took the money instead of vacation time. And our incidents went up because people were exhausted. People were burned out. There were so many issues. Oops. So I'm looking at this chat. I'm trying to look at it. I'm so sorry. And Lori says, when I was a QIDP in a provider home, I always made sure they were acknowledged for a great job. This is exactly what we're talking about. Never let them work extra shifts. But then, Lori, you were the one who got burned out. So then we need you to have trauma-informed supervision from your supervisor, because then you wouldn't have had to leave, right? But thank you for sharing that, because you tried so hard to make sure that nobody was working constantly and that people felt appreciated. And that's trauma-informed leadership. Thank you, Lori. We want to show appreciation. This is so big. And I am not just talking about DSP week, right? Somehow every week has to be DSP week. And I don't want to burn out managers either, but to really show appreciation is so important. And it might seem silly, staff member of the month, or might say, oh, why are we doing this? Nobody really cares about it. People do care about it. People do care about it. There was a wonderful, wonderful training that we had at this agency I work with. And this man just talked about, he ran his own agency, very successful agency, who served a lot of really challenging folks, but they did a great job. They were restraint-free. They were just wonderful. Didn't discharge people. And he said a big piece is we constantly write thank you notes. And some of us in the training thought, well, that's all right, but that's not that, come on, is a thank you note going to change your agency? This is not enough. But it was. What happened was our boss got a bunch of thank you notes and passed them out to all managers and said, you've got to thank everybody on your team for something that's real, not just thank you for being so wonderful. No, really, like thank you that you did, you worked that other night, or thank you that you took Joe to see his mother's grave. Well, all the things that are extra that people have been doing, to put it in writing and everybody write thank you notes. And we had to do it monthly, and then it all kind of petered out. But I've got to tell you, I saw so many thank you notes on bulletin boards in the house, on people's little cubby hole where they put, tacked it up on their bulletin board, where, bucket notes are what Carrie uses. I love that. Yeah, it's same kind of thing. I've seen people have big boards where everybody puts on, I really appreciation board, where people write down, I appreciate Linda. This week, she brought lunch for Joe when he was homesick, and blah, 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 blah. Appreciation boards. The more we make it concrete, the better it is. And when people have something they can hold on to, it makes a giant difference. That is very helpful. If you think about having had a boss who really appreciated you somewhere along your lines in your journey, it makes you want to come to work. Right? It makes you feel a little more motivated, a little more excited. Like, this person points out what I didn't know anyone realized I was doing. Oh, I love this. Emma says they have appreciation as part of their virtual weekly meetings and a written copy. That's beautiful. I worked in one situation where we would have, every meeting we started off with, we asked everybody to share something they were proud of. And then we all gave them positive feedback, like how wonderful that something, when we had weekly meetings, something they did that week that they were proud of. Unfortunately, I have to let my cat in, who is scratching at the door. Come on in. You'll meet my cat, maybe, I don't know. Sorry about that. Scratch, 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 scratch. So that appreciation is so important that we provide. And, this is JoJo. I appreciate him. Thank you for humoring me. And that, these ways that you share of appreciation, these things, thank you, Jeffrey. These things make a giant difference. It makes it looks like it's just a silly thing. And sometimes it can be a little bit hokey. No. It makes a difference. And if you think about that boss that appreciated you, and yes, and think about the folks, working through COVID, and the teams that you had, and the thank yous, and it makes such a difference. So thank you for all you did. And thank you for showing appreciation. And that's key, to make that a part of the culture, not just something we do once a year. Everybody gets a special dinner, or we used to have an ice cream truck, and that was really nice, but not enough. So, and appreciation should be very specific about, I appreciate these things about you, or that you did this, or that you're this kind of person, rather than a general thank you, which is nice, better than nothing. But let's really train our supervisors to be showing appreciation in concrete ways and in ways that are specifically about what that person contributes. Because then people feel seen and they feel acknowledged, right? And it's so wonderful. And opportunities for communication on all levels. So important that, you know, every now and then we have a larger meeting. Every now and then we hear from the boss. It can be very demoralizing when people never hear or see the boss, right? I think I don't have to say more on that, because that happens a lot in a lot of places, and you want to feel connected to something. You want to know that the person at the top is engaged, and if it's not too large of an organization, knows who you are, and if it isn't a large organization, at least knows what you do. Right? That makes a giant difference. Yeah. And thank you. Giving respect, Diane says, giving respect and autonomy equals appreciation. That is so true. That is so true. Giving that extra trust. I know you've got this. Rather than that micromanaging, right, can be very demoralizing. Thank you for that important point. What are some trauma-informed leadership skills? Debriefing, active supervision, cultural competency, respecting diversity, reflective practices, looking at yourselves periodically, saying, okay, am I doing what I need to do for this person or for this situation? And validation, validating people. So let's go through that. Debriefing. I've been in situations where somebody had to deal with someone. Okay, let me be more specific. There was a house manager who had worked for years with somebody. And one day she came in and he wasn't breathing. He was on his bed. He had taken a nap, and then he wasn't breathing. And she did CPR. She called 911. She lost this person she loved. His name was George. He was so wonderful. Everyone loved him. And what did her manager say? Did you do CPR correctly? Did you pull him on the floor, or did you do it on the bed? And I'm so horrified and sad to tell you she got written up for not. I mean, she called 911. She's talking to them. They got there quickly. He was gone. And she'd been there for years, but within weeks she quit because she was grieving. She was so sad. I can't tell you that I would have remembered to pull him on the floor. Probably not. I don't know if I would have even done CPR. I'd probably been screaming and crying. That's my nature. People need to be respected. They need space. Or there was a horrible incident. This guy broke a window, hurt another individual in the home. And the staff was called repeatedly for the incident report. And they were so shaken up that they're like, I can't write right now. Where's your incident report? Sadly, this is what goes on. We know this, right? This is what goes on in our world. People need to have debriefing when they go through anything very intense or traumatic, all of the above, right? They need to have a debriefing time. And you have to sit with that person and just let them talk. At one place where I worked, we did group debriefing. Yeah, she was trying to save this person. And she got written up, and someone who had been a wonderful longtime employee gone. We have to respect people, respect the fact that we're asking them to go through trauma as a part of their job. We have to thank them. And to debrief is to let them talk about what just happened, to let those feelings come out, not to criticize what they should have done. We can do that a whole nother time in a whole nother way. It's not the time. We ask people to go through trauma. And I believe it's best done one-to-one. The more we can do that one-to-one, the better it is, because that way, people are going to just be heard, because I have debriefed in groups. And oftentimes the very talkative person will take over, right? And the people that are really shaken up may not get to really talk about it or say what they need to say, because maybe they're not inclined to just talk a lot. So I think it's very important that we do it one-to-one. Oh my goodness. So Tanya is sharing an experience. And you were so upset. She went to a medical emergency here at work and misplaced her walkie, performed CPR. That's so traumatic to have to do that. Called the supervisor, said, I can't find my walkie, and you better find it or you'll be suspended, was the response. Tanya, I'm so sorry. You know what? There's so many examples like that, because the supervisor's not thinking this person just went through a trauma. They're thinking, this is what I need, and I need it, and you better find it. I need you to have that. This is how we lose our good staff, right? But that one-to-one debriefing, and the debriefing is done. I was often sent in as the clinical person to debrief with someone, but I'm not who was important to them. They wanted to sit with their manager. They wanted their direct boss to know what they had just gone through. It wasn't enough that it was me. So I really think it's important to have debriefing by the supervisor. There's one wonderful supervisor that I work with. Her name was Hope. And Hope was so great. And when there was trauma or an incident, Hope would have the person come in their office and she'd talk to them. She'd always have a soda for them or a snack and just sit with them. And then she'd write the incident report with them. Like, okay, I know this is due and I know it's too much. So let me just tell me what happened, and here you go. And okay, I wrote it, you just sign this. And is this good? Is this what you want? What support, right? She always remembered everybody's birthday. She just was so kind. And of everybody in the agency, her staff were the most solid, the least turnover, right? And she was there for people when there was yes, she was Hope. That's perfect. She was there for people. And, we have to train the supervisors. We, like you said, Crystal, yeah, we have to train the supervisors. So often people don't know, and they're just thinking themselves as, I'm the manager. We're not just, we're not making computers here. We have people's lives in our hands. And when things go wrong, it's traumatizing. It's traumatizing to do CPR. Oh my gosh. It's traumatizing to be in the middle of a behavioral incident. It's traumatizing when you have to take someone to the hospital. All these things are so hard. And people need that debriefing. They need that face-to-face. They need that support. And Hope got that. And she was aptly named. I'll have to tell her I talk about her. So safety and management is, what is that? It's being consistent. It's being fair. It's policies that are made clear. I know we had so many COVID policies, right? Like 10,000, one after another. Policies that are followed, updated when needed. Real policies that really mean something, right? Sometimes we have very antiquated policies that are just not okay. And yeah, so thank you. Laura says we have to balance that regulated required documentation with the trauma that people are experiencing. Thank you. And that means that sometimes the supervisor has to step up and help do it and not just dump everything on that person, or like Hope used to do, right? Let me assist you. Let me support you. Accessibility, listening. So that supervisor needs to be accessible. So many people have complained to me, well, they never answer my phone calls and I'm supposed to answer theirs, right? That listening, but then we have wonderful managers who are going out to the houses and doing all kinds of things or in the programs. So I think we have to train management differently and understand if you want to keep your staff, they have to feel like you care. They have to feel like you see them, you're validating their struggle, you're listening, you're showing respect, you're communicating, caring. And when that's there, people want to stay. You know, people feel a part of something. And when it's not there, it makes it very hard. Exactly. Tanya says, show them that you appreciate them. Thank you. And Paula agrees. Thank you. So true, right? Like we can all think about people that appreciated us and how differently it made you feel, rather than most of us can think of working in a situation where you weren't appreciated. And I know I left that situation the minute I felt like, I mean, I didn't leave it right away. I had to find something else, but I had one boss who used to criticize all of us and just tell us everything we did wrong all the time. And you just get worn down. You have to hear some positives. We can't do that to people, especially with this high-end stressful work. So thank you. A gentle teaching approach. So I had this wonderful experience of working with an agency in Saskatchewan, Canada, and they brought me in to do trauma-informed training with their staff. And they said, you know, you talk about, I'd written a book where I talked about gentle teaching, which is a beautiful approach by John McGee, who passed away, but he wrote many books about how to work with folks in a very nurturing and caring way. And so they said, we practice gentle teaching, you know, and we'll show you our houses, we'll show you our staff, we'll show you everything, and you do your trauma-informed care training. You know, it was wonderful. But boy, were my eyes open, and it was incredible. And I went there and I saw some important things. So I'm going to acknowledge first what Karyn said. I try to work so hard with my staff when they need things or times away, recognizing birthdays or special occasions, and try hard to make them feel like family. I let them know that they matter and they're the backbone of the home. I'm going to come work for you, Karyn. That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Thank you so much. You can leave. You got this. And Carolyn says, I always appreciated when my supervisor would let me know how much she appreciated me. So she let her staff know. And that's so beautiful because that trickles down, right? That's so wonderful. Thank you. Those comments were so great. And that's what I saw at Gentle Teaching at this agency called CORE. The executive director's name was Michael Lavis. And what Michael did was he cherished, instead of just doing gentle teaching, which is like listening, supporting, caring, very trauma-informed stuff before we called it that, he did it with the staff. He had me go, after all day training, I had to be dragged around from house to house, meet all the people, but most importantly, even though he was a very pretty large agency, he would introduce me to all the staff on shift. He knew everyone. He was asking about their kids. He had people setting up programs where whatever their hobby was, they could do it with the folks they supported. Like there was a guy running an art program. There was another one doing kickball tournaments. And it was so beautiful. So, and thank you, Angela. That's what I'm talking about, checking on your staff and caring. And that's the kind of thing we saw. He cared so much about his staff. And he said, we have 4% turnover, because all the staff are empowered to do programs based on what they love. There was a guy doing a music program. He was like in a rock and roll band, and they put on concerts. He did all kinds of stuff with folks. Everybody felt so cherished that they had 4% turnover. And during the second year of COVID, he decided to start supporting children. And he opened up his agency to support children. He didn't have to recruit anyone. He hired 100 staff without recruiting anyone. He got a ton of children referred to him, but he could handle it because everybody told their friends and family, come work here. You know, my job that I love, they're hiring. And people did that. And oh, thank you. So Elizabeth says, we began a traumatic events protocol for staff who perform CPR and Narcan. Oh my gosh, that is so wonderful, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. 8 hours of PTO and take the rest of the day or the next day off. And then the supervisor checks in with them within the week. That is the best policy, Elizabeth. Thank you. That is so perfect, so trauma informed. Thank you. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to share that with other agencies. That trauma protocol, if you had to perform CPR or deliver Narcan. Thank you. That is out of this world. That's what we should be doing. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you. I just appreciate everything everyone is sharing. Right. And I learned so much from this agency because everyone was so happy there. And because they were doing their thing, like the guy running the kickball tournaments loved it. And the other guy doing the art programs had a gallery where they were showing the work of the folks. And then he showed his own work. And then they started showing work of artists in the community. And everybody was a part of their community naturally because they empowered those DSPs to kind of be the gateway and the connectors by giving them their own thing or that they could do. So a management approach, fear-based versus support-based, right? We want to look at support-based. So much, it's so easy to slip into fear-based. You're going to get written up if you do that. And if you don't do this, you'll be in trouble. Like someone shared earlier, right? You know, if you lose that walkie, you're going to be suspended. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that. So, and I'm not sure that I can show this video, but another thing is that favoritism. I should have practiced earlier showing it. Sorry, I forgot, Amy, but favoritism hurts, right? I worked in one place where this one woman, she had 3 staff that were like her really close friends. And then she had 3 other staff. And the 3 staff that were her friends, they would party all the time together, which is fine, but they would talk about it. So the other 3 constantly felt left out. And they were all going out to dinner, they were going to happy hour, and they would come in and talk about it. And those other 3 people left, and those other 3 positions were constantly turned over because they felt they weren't included. It's fine to hang out, but when you have obvious favorites, it alienates everybody else, right? So let's see if this works. I'm going to ask you if you can hear it and if you can see it. Okay. Okay, can you guys see that? Okay, can you hear that and can you see it?
No.
Okay, never mind then. You can't, okay, you can't see anything? Huh.
No, I still just see your screen, Karen.
Okay, let's see.
Chicken names.
You don't see this? Okay, never mind.
No, but I can hear it.
We don't want that. Not good enough. I'm sorry, guys. You know what? I'm gonna try one more thing and then I'll give up. Okay?
I like your determination. I think that's important. That's a good lesson.
Oh, thank you. You're so supportive. Okay, let's see if we can do this. Oh, I'm not sure if this is it. Okay, can you hear this and can you see this?
Hello.
Mr. Burton.
Okay, can you hear that?
Yeah, but we can't see it.
Okay, now I will not show that perseverance. I'll just give up.
Okay. Well, they'll be able to, when we give them the slides, if the link is there, they'll be able to see that. And we can also send it with
Okay,
the
look,
continuing
I'm gonna
eds.
do it one more time. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right,
Hello.
here we go.
Hello.
Mr. Burns.
Oh, no need for alarm. I just came to give you the orchids and fragrant bath oils I lavish upon all my employees.
Oh, aren't you nice? Gee, this makes me wonder why morale here is so low.
I am the angel of death. The time of purification is at hand.
Oh, who cares? Marge, what can we do?
Well, you could give them healthier snacks. Theme days.
You mean like Child Labor Day?
Actually, I was thinking of Funny Hat Day.
Hmm.
Ooh, and how about piping in some Tom Jones music? That always cheers me up.
What's new, pussycat? Whoa, 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 whoa. What's new, pussycat? Whoa, 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 whoa.
It's working. It's working. And the healthy snacks are on their way.
You can't take our donuts!
Right? Anyone else want to be a hero?
Ooh.
All right. We need a little comic relief when we're talking about heavy stuff, right? Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. So favoritism hurts. And thank you. And Mr. Burns really favored Marge, but it kind of ruined it for everybody else. Okay. Just a little bit more. No, it's so funny. You guys are funny. Okay. Slideshow. Okay, can you see my slide? It says red flag.
We can. We're back in business.
We're doing it. We're killing it. Yay, guys. Thanks for the support. Sometimes I'm going to say the opposite of everything I've been saying, but sometimes people need to go, right? Sometimes you have someone who is completely destroying your morale, where they're pitting people against each other, or they're sabotaging, or they're creating disunity one way or another. Or they're not working and everybody else is picking up the slack and they get away with everything. And I'm sure many of you have experienced when somebody like that leaves, everything becomes lighter and better. So sometimes we have to just look at, is there a person who's kind of that bad apple really poisoning everything else? And is there a better place for them, like a different job? So, you know, this is another reality that can really affect morale. Exactly. Thank you, Catherine, experienced that. And, you know, this is a reality that we also sometimes we have to figure out how to really see what's the reality of what's going on and remove someone who may be creating a serious problem. And boy, do things lighten up after that happens. So people don't deserve that, right? So connection, that face-to-face supervision, meeting regularly as a team, even if it's just that some people are on FaceTime or whatever, but even if it's once a month, finding a way to make everybody feel a part of a team. That verbal communication in addition to written, responsiveness, seeking honest feedback, like, are you okay? Is there something you feel needs to be changed? And our positive regard is so important. Carol Dweck did the study. I always talk about the study. She did it with kids, but they were kids that all had average grades and average test scores. She divided them into two, and she told the first group of teachers, these kids are gifted and talented. They're so smart. And she told the second group of teachers, these kids have learning problems and they struggle. Well, the first group, those kids all performed really well. They went ahead 1 or 2 grade levels in a matter of months. And the second group, where the teachers thought they had a learning disability, the kids did worse. So somebody shared where you had a learning disability and you were labeled and put in a special ed class. And that is so demoralizing. And that's what happened in this study. And the kid did worse. The kids all did worse. So how many of us know a boss that no matter what you do, I hope you're not with them. And I don't mean to be stirring anything up here, but it's never good enough, right? You start doing less. You start feeling discouraged. You don't initiate things. You don't try as hard. Versus, I hope everybody here has had a boss who gives them positive regard. I know some people shared that, a boss who appreciates them. You see yourself differently. You feel good about yourself. They're saying you're really good at this. You feel good at it. You blossom. So how can we give that positive regard? So important. So important. Give that positive regard. And you need to take care of yourself as managers, as people on the front lines, all of you on every level. We have to figure out exactly like how can we take care of ourselves, and how can we be that boss who's conveying that positive regard. To do that, you have to take care of you too. We can't always expect that our bosses are going to be perfect, but at least we can take care of ourselves and do what we need to do to make the buck stop there and not pass the negativity down, right? But to really enjoy ourselves. A positive affirmation helps Catherine every day. I love that. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And that teacher said you couldn't go to college. That's horrible. So we need to be the people that say, I believe in you, to our staff, and we need to believe in ourselves. So I have something fun for you that you can do with your staff, or you can do with each other, or you can just do with yourself. It's on my website, which I will put in the chat. I should have had that on the slide. Sorry about that. But it's called the Happiness Assessment. Very simple website, KarynHarvey.org. The Happiness Assessment for staff. And you can assess what really makes you happy, and you might come up with things you've forgotten about that you really enjoy, like hobbies you enjoy, people you want to be with, things that bring meaning to your life. This is all based on Martin Seligman's book Flourish and his approach to happiness and positive psychology. And do the happiness assessment for you. You know, do that happiness assessment for you. And you deserve it. Happiness is something we actually have to work at. Oh, and there's a great app. Andrea said there's a great app called Insight Timer. Oh, I love that. I'm going to look for that. Thank you so much. We have to actively pursue our happiness. You know, unfortunately, I hope there aren't any children around, but you know, the whole Santa Claus thing, let me just leave it at that. Not happening to us right now. We're really good, but there's nobody coming down the chimney. So we have to pursue our happiness. You're wonderful and you deserve it, but it might have to be at your own hand, right? And happiness is something we have to work at. So I want to encourage everybody to look at your happiness, to pursue it. And if you want to download, it's free, the Happiness Assessment for Staff, and kind of have this little document where you assess, you kind of write in what the things you love, but things that maybe you forgot about that you really enjoy, and then a procedure for making yourself happy, right? Yay. Okay, and finally, we have Daisaku Ikeda, who's a great Buddhist scholar, and he says, I love this quote, "The inner determination of an individual can transform everything. It gives ultimate expression to the infinite potential and dignity inherent in each human life." Right? Infinite potential and dignity in each human life. So one person determined, one person seeing the good in people, one person saying, I'm going to create a happier atmosphere. It sounds like many of you do this. Many of you do this, and I know you do. And your determination, your ability to lead can change everything. One person can change an entire organization. Hope, set an example for that entire organization of how to cherish your staff and how to keep your staff, you know, and people noticed, and people started doing things differently. And she wasn't the boss. She just set an amazing example. There's a term in organizational psychology called lead from any chair, right? No matter what chair you're in, you can be that leader with that example. So thank you so much. I'm going to save the last 10 minutes for questions and discussion. And I love the comments we've been having. It's been wonderful. So I stopped sharing, and anyone would like to share something in the chat, or I don't know, Amy, if we want to unmute people or whatever anyone would like to do. Oh, thank you, Brittany. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. I think it's a good reminder, you know, that I don't know, it's so important to sort of start with ourselves, right? Because we're dealing with a lot. And so I think that's very, very, very necessary information.
So we have 2 participants that want to share. This is great. Oh, and thank you, Onika. Okay. Can we, I don't know how to, or am I the one that needs to unmute them? Oh, thank you. With the raised hands, can people go ahead and speak? How should we do that, Amy?
Yeah, I think you have to unmute them because you are the,
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, let's see. I can do this. I know I can. All right. So Tiara and then Tamara. Okay. But somehow asked to unmute. Okay. You guys can unmute. So let's say, Tiara, would you unmute and ask your question? Thank you. Pen. Oh, can you unmute? Oh, how about Tamara? You're unmuted. You go. And then we'll go to Tiara. Tamara, hello. Well, I can't hear you. Oh, goodness. I'm so sorry. Do you want to put your questions in the chat? I think because we're having a technical issue. You are unmuted, but I can't hear you, Tamara. And then Tiara, do you want to try unmuting again? And then we'll just go to the chat. Okay. I'm sorry, you guys. We're having a technical problem. Okay, so Tamara didn't have a question. She just, oh, thank you, Tamara. That's so nice. I will cherish that. Thank you. And would anybody else? And Tiara, are you okay? Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for all these nice comments. Thank you for hanging in there till the end. This was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you all do. It sounds like so many of you already, you're doing this, you know, you guys are doing it and you're making such a difference. That's another important point here, is that you don't realize the difference you're making just by being kind, just by seeing someone and thanking them and appreciating them. Makes a giant difference. Oh, thank you, Brittany. I don't know what I'll be doing in the future. Who knows?
yeah, I guess, I mean, I have a question for you. I love to pick your brain. So I'm gonna take this 7 minutes and make it mine. So you've done a lot of trainings, right? We started with just trauma-informed care, and I say just, but that's a pretty big topic, right? And then we did some train the trainer stuff, which was awesome. And then we did trauma-informed behavior plans, and then sort of trauma-informed leadership today. And so what's a common thread that you sort of see that is weaved through all of these different sort of topics that people could leave, or maybe that have attended all of the sessions, as sort of a main takeaway?
Oh, thank you. Well, I guess I have to say valuing people's humanity. You know,
Oh,
you are making a difference, Mitzi. Don't doubt yourself. Don't be discouraged. You're doing great. You're wonderful. But to value humanity, and let's first of all acknowledge somebody with a disability made this for me and gave it to me at a conference, Defend Human Dignity. I love this. And that's kind of the point, you know, that people with disabilities aren't a different species of human. They're precious, important humans, and there but for a twist of fate go we. And we know they need to be treated as humans and with their whole humanity respected, not just looking at a part of them or labeling them or, you know, alienating them as a different type of person, but embracing their humanity. And then we have to do the same with staff. Embrace that humanity, treasure that person, you know, help them to feel like they are making that difference. Like Mitzi needed to feel, thank you, Mitzi, you are making that difference. And that's what counts, that we treasure people's humanity and that we treasure ourselves as well.
yeah. And why is it so easy for us to forget that, you know?
I know. That's so true. And that's the world we live in, right? Where we're never good enough and we're so hard on ourselves. And, you know, we have to change that. And I think seeing it and recognizing it is a big piece of that, that we have to cherish ourselves in order to be able to cherish others.
Yeah.
Yep. So Carrie says we have to respect everyone's version of what their trauma is. Exactly. Everybody's trauma is valid. That's why I talk about the little t traumas that look so small to other people are really big, impactful traumas to people. And everybody's been through so much. Thank you, Carrie. That's a big take home lesson from all of this. And then Mary saying kindness, our tone, our delivery to others is key. Exactly. To treat people how we want to be treated. And if we were a person in that group home setting, how would we want to be treated? And if we were that staff dealing with all that stuff and maybe, you know, having to help people with their toileting issues and take, you know, behavioral issues and deal with them and not take it personally and do all that, how would we want to be treated?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I love what Catherine says. She said, we're all amazing. Some of us just need a little more love and attention to reveal our true beauty. Exactly. That says it all. Thank you for that great question, Amy.
Yeah. Well, thank you so, so much. This has just been a wonderful partnership that we've had, and I know we're going to continue, you know, well into the future. I promised a few housekeeping things at the end, and so you will get continuing ed for this. Danielle does ask that you give her about 14 business days. If you have not received it at the end of the 14 business days, I will put her email in the chat box. You should reach out to her and we will make sure that you get that. But we have done several large trainings, so it does take a little bit of time for her to be able to process those. Unfortunately, it's not automatically generated. And so it is a person going in and creating each one of those certificates. So we do ask that you give us the 14 days before you reach out. And we do have other trainings coming up. We have an OCD training coming up, and then we have a self-care training coming up with a pretty cool Christmas in July theme. And so I think that will tie in nicely to what we talked about today. And then we do have a couple of other trauma trainings that have come up from ICPN clinical staff that have sort of taken this under their belt. And so, yeah. So it's super exciting. So I hope everybody has a great weekend and find something you can do that will fill your cup. I think that's one of the takeaways that I have learned, is that it's sort of like the oxygen mask in the airplane, right? Like we can't be good if we don't take care of ourselves first. And so I encourage you all to do that. And thank you so, so much, Dr. Harvey. It has been just an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of your support. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
See ya.